It's Friday the 18th of May 2018. You're listening to Amusing Ourselves to Death. Hi, Kam.
Hello.
What a week it's been. Millions of stories.
Very busy.
We're going to talk about the new head of the Serious Fraud Office, Fracking, CLadding, and many, many other things.
As much as we can fit in, probably. So lots of little bits of news.
Yeah, I'd just like to start off by saying I think that John McDonnell should nationalise INEOS.
Amen.
This whole fracking thing in the papers today, they're saying...
INEOS is a fracking company, by the way, for those that didn't know that yet.
Yeah, so Ratcliffe is now... Jim Ratcliffe, who owns INEOS, he's now the richest person in the country, according to the Sunday Times Rich List, which is not necessarily that reliable. And he just wants to force everyone into accepting fracking. So they say, oh, yes, the public were really worried about immigration. The public voted for Brexit. But what about fracking?
Well, fracking has been consistently opposed by the public. I think a little while ago, about 70% of the public didn't want it or wanted more testing to happen. And the Scottish government has called a moratorium on it for 5 years, and scientists have said, give us more time to check that it's even going to make any money or if it's even worth it. But there's been no halt. So despite the opposition from the public, under Cameron, he pushed through laws that meant that people could frack without the public's permission. They could frack your backyard without people's permission. And from there on, there's just been consistent overturning of democratic decisions whereby local councils and local groups, because obviously this has mobilised local communities where it's happening, where they've won that they don't want fracking in the area, the government's come in and overturned it. So it's really being forced on the public.
Yeah, I understand that the business secretary is currently Greg Clark. He was the local government secretary. And it was Greg Clark and Sajid Javid. They swapped jobs when Theresa May came in. But yeah, between them, they've been local government and business for a while until Javid just moved on. But I think they were backing each other up. So I think Javid was saying, I'm going to pass the laws that mean that local councils can be overruled. Mm-hmm. And Clark was also saying, depending which hat he was wearing, whether he was local government or business, he was there saying, yeah, don't worry, fracking is good for Britain, let's get on with it.
They've also been, INEOS has received one of the first kinds of secret injunctions of its kind, one of the most far-reaching injunctions that happened in a secret court, that basically meant that that was against kind of protest, because protest was working in local areas where people were mobilising. So after they won this injunction at a secret court, they were able to start putting up notices on fracking sites where permission hadn't even been sought yet, saying that we intend to frack here, you can't talk about it, you can't protest about it. And they wanted this to be as wide-reaching as to go as far as kind of social media and all those things. So the degree of rights that they are granting these fracking companies, is it surprising that someone like Jim Ratcliffe would become one of the richest people in the UK when they're afforded all of these rights? Okay,
so the government are really helping him in the sense that, as you said, they were able to take out injunctions and things like that to stop people from protesting, which they thought it was inevitable people will protest. So we've been doing that. Now, what else has been going on? I made a little film the other day, just playing around with some software about INEOS, and therefore did a bit of research. And it turns out that INEOS, actually, Jim Ratcliffe, they'd like to say, oh, he's from Oldham and he's come good.
Yeah, they've been talking up his working class roots to billionaire story, haven't they?
Yeah, and that is all obviously true, but I think he's more linked in with Iran than he is with Oldham now, because BP used to be called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and Jim Ratcliffe in 1992, when he first got into business, was in private equity, and the first deal they did was buying up BP's old chemical businesses, buying up lots of chemical businesses and being very, very good at running them, and then eventually getting into ethanol and fracking. So that's really what he does. And
he also wants to use fracking to create more plastic.
Okay.
One of the kind of eccentric stories about him, there's a good interview, by the way, on Real Media with Joe Corey, where he talks about everything you need to know about INEOS. But he tried to get planning permission for his house to be built on stilts so that when climate change happens, he's fine.
Right, okay, interesting. So yeah, nicely insured. Also...
Sorry, but the BP stuff, that's really important. It was a great video you did.
Okay, yeah, and thank you. At the beginning of the year, last year, I think around April, they announced that they were going to be buying up some North Sea pipeline, Grangemouth or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but in Scotland. And then in December, it went through. This December passed. And as soon as he officially owned it, he said, right, okay, the pipeline's broken.
It's got hairline crack in it?
Yeah, so before he bought it, he said, North Sea oil is dead. And then afterwards, he said, oh, but let's just buy it anyway. And then afterwards, he closed it. And when he closed it, that's 40% of the fossil fuel, apparently, that comes into Scotland. And so guess what happened to the prices? They went up.
Wow.
And so I put some tweets about this in this short film, but it's people just saying, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with somebody like this running the access. In electricity, they call these interconnectors.
Yeah, how much control does he have over...
So it's totally deregulated.
energy.
This guy's got all of this control. This is basically, it's like he's running the grid, and he's tripling his money officially, according to the well, not officially, but he's tripling his money in terms of billions that he has. So this is BP that's giving him this stuff. BP used to be owned by the government, and there doesn't seem to be much of a sort of competition issue being asked here, and he's just got a lot of control. So yeah, basically, I think John McDonnell should just say, we're taking all of this off you. Because McDonnell is being accused of being like this anyway. So part of me, I know it's not.
And the government's, we just had the renationalisation of East Coast, so maybe it's inevitable. He should just go out and say it. I mean, the suggestion that you made that Jim Ratcliffe's company, INEOS, was serving as a kind of BP
It's a shadow
proxy
BP, isn't
company.
it? Yeah, it's like a shadow BP.
Is now protected through all this secrecy, which means it can get away with doing what it wants.
Well, of course, there's no AGM for INEOS because it's not on the stock market. And on Monday, it is the BP AGM. And I asked Share Action to go up and do a workshop in Manchester for anybody who wants to go to the AGM. I haven't asked them, if they went ahead with it and how it went. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what kind of coverage we get on Tuesday off the back of the BP AGM. Anything else on that particular subject? Well, given that we're talking about fracking and AGMs, well, there were two little offshoots on this one. One of them is my friend, or our friend, Roger Hallam. I met up with him the other day, and he still thinks that we need a lot more people prepared to be arrested and convicted for some kind of environmental activism in order for it to start going up the priority list of politicians and to get things banned. And so we're just going over how to go about doing that. He's going to go up and down the country telling people, are you prepared to get arrested for this? If so, then, we'll think about this, we'll talk about this, and we'll prepare. And on a particular day, let's go for it. Good for him. We're obviously going to follow him around and help him with whatever he wants. Speaking of protest, you told me a story about somebody who was protesting.
A new story in BuzzFeed this week, really shocking, by Patrick Strudwick. I hope I've pronounced that right. So there was a young guy, I think about 22 years old. His name's Matthew, and he was infected with HIV in a case where somebody had infected a series of people. I think it was 5 people, and he intended to infect 5 more. Now, this young man helped bring this whole case to justice and helped see it through, and these 5 guys are now entitled to some, or could be women as well, are now entitled to £22,000 worth of compensation. And he's been blocked from receiving that, even though he helped bring this case to trial, even though he helped bring this guy to justice.
Well, why is that? Why isn't he allowed to get his compensation, which he would normally be entitled to?
It seems to be because of shouting some slogans at a Tory MP. So he apparently interrupted a Tory politician, which BuzzFeed said they won't name to protect his anonymity.
The anonymity of who?
A Tory politician.
Right. So
that was interrupted by this young man. And apparently the things that he was shouting were things such as no ifs, no buts, no public sector cuts. So this was an anti-austerity, one-man protest. to get his voice heard.
And when was the law passed that said that if you're entitled to compensation, you can't have it if you've got a conviction?
Yeah, well, this is it. So he was given a community order, I think, off the back of that. And because that hadn't been spent yet, he's Scottish. And so apparently it takes 5 years for this to be spent, whereas it would take 2 years in England. But that means that there was a law passed in November 2012, which means that you can't claim compensation if you have an unspent conviction or
so it's a Tory
order
law
against you.
It's
It's a Tory law.
The coalition passed a law, and he was complaining about coalition policy, and they used a separate law to stop him from being compensated for a completely unrelated thing. Right? Okay. So apparently Ruth Davidson is
Is right.
trying to help him.
Yeah. I mean, incredible story. An incredible story.
Compassionate
Talking about
conservatism at work.
Yeah. Well, freedom of speech, right? Sam Gimia talking about freedom of speech on campuses, institutional hostility. We need to be able to say what we want. Here's a guy who just said a well-known slogan and protested, which is surely within his rights. And he's now been prevented from getting £22,000 worth of compensation for being infected with HIV. That's shocking.
Well, if any of our millions of listeners up and down the country could tell us who what politician was, we'd be quite interested in knowing.
Absolutely.
All right, what about cladding?
Yes, well, in the last week, we've had the 11-month anniversary since the Grenfell fire and the results of the review by Dame Judith Hackett. Now, she assured us that this was going to be far-reaching. She was going to look at what caused it and we were going to nip this in the bud. And it's taken them 11 months to tell us that we are not going to ban combustible cladding. Now,
hold on, did you say we're not going to ban it?
We are not going to ban. There is not going to be an outright ban for combustible cladding on high-rises.
But who said that?
Well, this came as a result of her review.
So her review
she's
said,
not called...
I'm not recommending a ban.
Yes.
But apparently the government is going to ban it anyway.
I'm not sure they are.
Oh, right. I'm sure I heard they were. But, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to have read the official document.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that they are going to do that.
In the Sun today, they said it must be banned in the editorial.
So
this is the Sun.
Yeah.
They said it must be banned.
Yeah.
Which probably means it's too late.
So if
we can't not
why is
ban
the
it.
Sun saying that? But Dame Judith Hackett, who has led this review, is not able to say that. Now, if we put this into some context, I remember the day after the Grenfell fire, I think there was like a 10-minute segment on BBC News, and there was a 10-second clip with a building firm, and they didn't say our condolences. They didn't say, sending their thoughts to the people affected. All they said in this clip was, we followed the regulations.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, it's the company law, isn't it? They've got to cover their backs.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Chris Cook on Newsnight then, and you could just see that all he was trying to do, by the way, disclaimer, he has blocked me on Twitter, but all he was doing was just trying to say there's nothing to worry about. In terms of this cladding, there's nothing to worry about.
Really?
Yeah, blatantly.
Well, this is about, so...
He's got lots of Tory links, by the way.
Sure.
From the past, he claims not to be now.
Yeah. The thing is, it's not like this hasn't been preempted. So previously, I think Inside Housing did a campaign called Never Again, which was talking about recommendations for what should happen after Grenfell. And one of the first things they said was instate the recommendations that came after the Lacknell House fire, which happened in 2009, where 6 people died. And the recommendations were simplify and bolster the health and safety and fire safety regulation and install sprinklers. Now, those are pretty simple things to do, and the Fire Brigades Union says that no one has died in a UK building with a properly fitted sprinkler system. Now, we were talking about sprinklers shortly after the fire for a long time, and yet that's just not being talked about at all right now. And yet, here are the two things that we need to happen: banning this cladding and installing sprinklers, because allowing that cladding to go on, who do you think is going to get that cladding? It's not going to be Dame Judith Hackett. It's not going to be Theresa May. It's not going to be Camilla Cavendish, who was on BBC QT last night saying, it's a great review. Aditya Chakraborty correctly pointed out that Camilla Cavendish, who used to be editor of the Sunday Times, then went on to be policy unit for David Cameron and was there during the time that they were ripping through these health and safety regulations, is defending this review that doesn't ban combustible cladding.
What did she say when he said that?
well, I think he just they went to someone else. So Aditya had responded, but he said this is the revolving door, and that's exactly what this is.
Oh, he used that term.
He did, yeah. Brilliant intervention by him.
All right. Any more on cladding?
Well, that's it from the review. That's the shocking piece of evidence that's come out this week. The point is that this is preventable. These are preventable 71 at least deaths, and the government doesn't seem to be going. This review doesn't suggest that it's learning the lessons that we need to learn, and we'll hear all of those, hackneyed terms about lessons learned and never again, and yet we're not doing the things that need to happen. There's some parallels, I guess. We've also had the press regulation. So Leveson 2, there's a vote against it happening. That's not happening anymore. Similarly, another big review that never goes to the end point, right? We never get Leveson 2 out of that phone hacking scandal. I've been working and speaking to...
Hold on, we're not... Let's be honest, even though...
I don't necessarily agree with it. My point is that we have these big reviews, and what happens as a result of them? There's currently a review happening into 3 medical scandals affecting women.
Yeah, but just before we say that, just to say this, when it comes to Leveson 2 and press regulation and whatever else, I think that we ought to do something on this, for real media, because I don't think this is being communicated properly. And when I say that, I don't...
Because it involves the media.
Well, I don't mean I even fully understand it either, by the way. I just think that if we start talking about that now on this podcast, we're almost assuming that anyone understands what we're talking about, which
absolutely.
means that
I'm not here to talk about it.
We think we know what we're talking about. I don't even think I do on this.
Yeah,
because
definitely
I just think there is
clarity.
so much fake news and misinformation about this. And I would just like to say that having read the Sun and Mail editorials throughout last week and a little bit of this week, there's a lot of misinformation going around.
Of course there is.
And
it's the media defending themselves.
Yeah, sure. And in relation to what the Clearborn video that we did was, when in her book she says the first rule of PR is to defend PR. That's obviously what was going on with the press regulation. So they're still on it, and it's very interesting the way they're doing that. But yeah, you were saying that you're frustrated at the way in which the review's going on with cladding and drawing parallels with everything else. And I can see your point that there's a strategy that goes on.
Well,
there's a mix of PR, mainly PR.
So the last example is
also legal and
is this medical devices and safety review, which is 3 scandals involving women. So mesh, valproate, sodium valproate, and I've just gone blank on the last one.
It's Primidos.
Primidos, that's it. And mesh, there's mounting evidence of this.
This is vaginal mesh,
vaginal mesh, which is women were implanted with as a kind of a solution to, minor incontinence after pregnancy and so on. And so they're implanted with this plastic. Now, what's coming out is that clearly there hadn't been enough tests done on this thing. It's affected loads of women. It's completely debilitated some women. And the companies have known this, and the risk factors have been higher than they've said, and so on. Now, all of this is coming out, but Jeremy Hunt and Theresa May have both committed to not banning mesh. Despite the review happening, despite Jeremy Hunt saying that this is about patient safety, I'm going to look into everything and listen to patients, they've committed already to not banning it. So these big reviews that happen, it's really a theatre. Because what do we get as a result of it? Do we stop the things we needed to stop? I'm not sure we do.
All right, well, I can tell you're quite angry about this, Kam, and fair enough. I know you've met a lot more people in the world of mesh than I have, actually, because I haven't met anyone. I've listened to you tell me about this, and I think I remember you telling me there's people in wheelchairs. You met people who can't walk and these kinds of other stories.
It's had loads of operations done. Maybe we should talk about it on a future episode, but the thing with mesh is that it highlights all of these problems in our regulatory system, which means that medical devices can get passed without proper clinical trials. But also that it's meant to be permanent and not meant to be taken out. So when there is problems, these women have faced huge amounts of problems with actually getting this removed from their bodies. This thing that is now changing and cutting them and hurting them and disintegrating and bending, and it's inside them and they can't get someone to take it out. One lady I spoke to, she had 3 different operations to try and take it out. She then finally went to the only person that she's met that really had any expertise in being able to do it.
So based on previous conversations, actually they can find people to get them out, but the government isn't really helping train up people to be able to do that and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So one mesh.
So it's not just that they're allowing these devices to be widespread, they're then afterwards preventing the acknowledgement of the problem, and then therefore, I mean, not acknowledgement, but they're preventing. It's almost like bombs that you have to defuse. They're not allowing that to happen. Is that what you mean? Because you said they've got these things inside them and they can't get them fixed.
Well, these things were designed to be permanent, so there's no expertise in how to take them out. So they've passed this mesh. It's passed regulation without being properly tested. It's designed to be permanent, so when it goes wrong, no one's got the skills to be able to remove this from people's body, because it gets entangled into your bits of your body and your nervous system and so on.
Okay. Speaking of, I mean, there's so many things on my list of things to mention today, so we're going to start going through them a little bit quicker. Chris Day. Have you heard that name before?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking up and down my feed on Twitter, and it appears that he is a junior doctor whistleblower who for 3 years was saying there's no such thing as whistleblower protection for junior doctors. And I think his career would have been blighted as a result of this.
Of course.
But he won his case, apparently. Apparently he won this case this week, so good for them. On the subject of whistleblowers, yesterday I met Mary Inman, who is a lawyer from America with a firm called Constantine Cannon. And she's come over here. She's been here in England for 11 months because her firm had a look at the numbers, and they said in their offices in San Francisco, Washington, and New York, all of their offices were dealing with people from outside the US who wanted to bring claims in America to take companies to court for either defrauding the US taxpayer or defrauding their shareholders, company shareholders. And she's winning cases for Brits in America. So she
Amazing.
wants to take more cases on in America, and hopefully we're going to do some kind of an interview with her.
That'll be fantastic.
Yeah. Now, what was also interesting for me was before I arranged to meet her, I saw that there was an article in the Times talking about another revolving door example, which is the head of the Serious Fraud Office, David Green. He's about to go and work for a law firm called Slaughter and May, which is quite interesting because as head of the Serious Fraud Office, he knows what his decision-making process is behind choosing who to take to court to prosecute. And apparently he's been much more aggressive than the previous people because he's gone after banks, Barclays, and other people over Euribor, LIBOR, these types of things. Not as much as he could have, but so the idea is that they have limited funds and they need to get some wins and bring some money in. So he's going to go to Slaughter and May. But what does that mean? That means that if you are worried that you could get prosecuted, if you go to Slaughter and May and you say, hi, I'm a big company, can I have your services? By the way, how do I avoid being prosecuted? Then he'll say, well, here are the arguments that we find really difficult to deal with in court.
Yeah.
So now if you use these, then
Revolving door.
Yeah, when we approach you and we knock on your door and we say, we're going to investigate you, then you can say, what about this, what about that? And we'll just walk away. Because we know that those are the arguments we don't know how to win on, that are too expensive for us, blah, blah, blah. Because these firms obviously have more money than the Serious Fraud Office.
Of course.
And they are what's called too big to jail. So I think the general understanding is they turn around and they say to the Serious Fraud Office or the Department of Justice in America, and they say, we really want to get to the bottom of this problem because we didn't know about it. There are always a few rotten apples in every barrel. You know, we didn't know about this. I tell you what, if you make sure that we get off with just a massive fine, then we'll investigate it. We'll hire people and we'll investigate it, and then we'll tell you, and hopefully this will never happen ever again.
Of course not.
So that's what they do, and he's going to be able to help them do that and get paid a lot more money. So there needs to be a replacement for him because he's leaving. Obviously, if you watch real media, you'll see that Nicholas Wilson, the HSBC whistleblower, took on Amber Rudd at the last election, and he said, in your manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, you want to close down the Serious Fraud Office and merge it with the National Crime Agency, which is run by the Home Office, which is Sajid Javid now, ex-Deutsche Bank derivatives salesman. And the person who's been mentioned, I think it's not been announced, but everybody knows that the new...
It's already been written about, though, hasn't it?
Yeah, on the 26th of April in the Times, they said that the new head of the Serious Fraud Office is going to be this woman called Lisa Osofsky. And in the Times, they said she's ex-FBI. If you read the article, it also says that she's worked for Goldman Sachs. She used to work for the Department of Justice 20 years ago, where she was seconded to the Serious Fraud Office to look at the BCCI scandal, which was, in a way, an early terrorist finance and drug finance operation. This is in the 90s, early 90s. So this is her experience. But what they don't go and say afterwards, well, they mention it slightly. They say that one of her current clients is HSBC. But they do it in the kind of penultimate paragraph.
Yeah.
And you don't really notice it. And they don't make it sound too bad. But actually, if you look at her CV on LinkedIn, and also I've looked at other things that she's written in the past and things that have been written about her, you can see that she's the only person, and they say this in the paper, in the Telegraph, she was one of the only commentators to agree with Theresa May that the SFO should be shut down. She seems, she makes
Really?
it, yeah, she makes it sound as though, so that's exactly like in America, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
With Mulvaney closing down the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Board, right?
He wanted to eliminate the organisation, and then he was made head of the organisation and instantly went about changing its motive.
He moved their employees into the basement, sent them to Dallas and all this other stuff.
And he said that their main challenge was now finding unduly regulation and burdensome regulation and getting rid of it.
Yeah, so in terms of how democracies die, this is what they say. You've got to just dismantle the organizations and the institutions. So in terms of Trump just saying nothing anyone says can be believable, so he just dismantles everything just like that. Don't believe anything, blah, blah, blah. So this woman here, she might be coming in to do that.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at who she's worked for, so FBI, Department of Justice. Then afterwards, she does a 2-year stint working as the money laundering officer for Goldman Sachs for 2 years, 2004, 2005, that kind of period.
You can't vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs.
Well, at the time that she's doing that, so she's the in-house counsel for Goldman Sachs for money laundering and I guess that type of stuff, making sure that they don't get done for anything, regardless of whether they're doing it, of course. Then she does 6 or 7 years working for a company called Control Risks. I was telling you earlier on that whilst that seems like a kind of funny name for a company, about 15 years ago, I remember I was working on some campaign and, I was actually working in banking at the time, but I was doing this other sort of political campaign to do with the World Bank. And I saw that at this place called the Royal African Society in central London, which is at the SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies University, there was a poster saying that this man was going to talk about the role of the private military corporation in the 21st century. So it was Tim Spicer, who used to run a company called Aegis Defence Services, who are mercenaries, and they got the $300 million contract to run all of the mercenaries in Baghdad in 2003-04. And a lot of the US companies were pretty angry because they thought, why has this English guy got this contract? So he was coming to talk, and so I decided to look into mercenaries, and I came across the company Control Risks. And
would she have been there at the time?
She joined in 2006, so afterwards, but not long afterwards. And Control Risks have a massive Iraqi operation. And if you look at the website Glassdoor is a website that tells you what it's like to work for a firm. And everything says, really good place to work if you're a public school white guy, and not if you're a woman or anything else. And many other things, but that's the basic conclusion. So she's there, and they're mercenaries. You can see on their website that they have guns, and that's what they do. They protect assets and people. The kind of company that an insurance firm would be hiring as well, in order to protect things. So it's mercenaries.
And didn't she say something about the environment she wanted to create when she becomes SFO head?
Oh, yeah. So this is what Lindsay McGowie and Clearborn talk about in terms of strategic ambiguity and strategic ignorance. So she said, what we ought to do is, this isn't when, she didn't say this in response to being appointed, but in the past she's just said, we need to make Britain a safe place to do business. And I think what she meant was, we need to follow terrorist finance. But the ambiguity there for me is, safe place means a place where you're not going to die of a terrorist bomb. But if you're a company, it's a safe place.
You can get on with it.
The SFO are not going to come after you. You're not going to be done for anti-corruption and stuff like that. So this is a little bit of her background. Now, Jim Armitage, who's the city editor for the Evening Standard, so his boss is George Osborne, who couldn't be accused of being disloyal to HSBC at any point. You know, he's done a lot to help them. And by the way, the French documentary Gangsters of Finance is very good on this. Jim Armitage wrote a piece in 2015 in which he said, who regulates the regulators? Oh, because I forgot to say, this woman, Lisa Osofsky, she goes to work for Goldman Sachs, then Control Risks. And then afterwards, in 2013, she starts working for a company called Exiger, Exiger. I'd never heard of them. So it's funny that this week, as a result of the Carillion sort of fallout, the Business Select Committee said, maybe we should break up the big four, the audit firms. We call them audit firms, but they've started to do other services as well that are more profitable. So this is KPMG, PwC, Ernst & Young and Deloitte.
Young.
Yeah, so these companies, they're saying they've become too big to fail. And
it's a cartel, they've been described
we need
as.
to break them up. But Jim Armitage wrote a piece in 2015 in which he says, who regulates the regulators? And he says that these companies, Exiger, etc., what's happening is Exiger were created because HSBC were having all of this action against them. And I think nobody at HSBC was able to carry on running the compliance service for HSBC. So they said, right, we'll just hire outside people to do it. And Exiger is a startup regulation firm whose job it is to keep you out of trouble. So she went from a mercenary firm to taking over compliance for the biggest drug and terrorist finance organization in the world, HSBC. They will find multiple billions, but kept their license because Osborne helped them to. Yeah. So this is her. Now, Rona Fairhead, who's our international trade minister at the moment, she used to be in charge of the BBC Trust, which was supposed to oversee the BBC, and she was appointed by Sajid Javid. And now we have this woman, Lisa Osofsky, who's going to take over the anti-fraud, anti-corruption stuff. So this is a clear case of poacher turns gamekeeper.
Such a seamless movement between US government, private corporation, UK government.
Iraq, HSBC. And the thing is, it's a racket as well. So this is all too big to jail. And the other thing that goes on in this world is deferred prosecutions. So you never get done for criminality. You pay $1 billion and it's a deferred prosecution, and that's the cost of doing business. Your shareholders might be a bit upset, but it's a slap on the wrist and you carry on making money. So there seems to be this big movement at the SFO, I've noticed, just through glancing at their website and reading the news, to say, we don't have much money at the SFO. So what we need to do is we need to turn ourselves into a profit centre. We don't want to change people's behaviour. We want to make as much money as possible. So on a short budget that we've got, we need to work out how to make profit. And I think the FCA think the same. And
Financial Conduct Authority.
I think it's really worrying having somebody like that in charge. Now, on the other side, because she's American, she might want to bring in a whistleblower agency. But my argument is that she's been away from America for so long that she's unlikely to do that. I saw one article where she said, we need to go back to the old English way where your word is your bond. Coming from her, who quite clearly, I don't think can be trusted on anything.
It's an interesting wider conversation because the SFO, there's a good Bloomberg article about it, is the only organisation tasked with high-level corporate crime. And there was a good quote in there where David Cameron said, I think they need to be careful about commercial interests. And basically, the growth of the business needs to matter when you're regulating them. So the Financial Conduct Authority, Ian Fraser, financial journalist, would argue that it's entirely captured regulator that works for the banks. So, like, is the SFO just going through this transition where it's becoming an entirely operating for these companies? And this is obviously also a bigger conversation in terms of Grenfell and all of the regulations that we have. Are our regulators just entirely working for the profits of companies?
Yeah, and I think if you think about the politics of information, what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. So if you say the truth sometimes on these occasions, you'll be done for libel. And the press say they want to be free so they can do investigations, but they don't investigate anything relevant.
Yeah.
And so information isn't allowed to flow freely. The truth doesn't really get published in many ways. And these guys are able to just close down investigations. So somebody like her, so let's say you're at work and you've got a problem, and then let's say you work in banking or something like that, and you see massive fraud. At the moment over here, as we mentioned last week, the guy from Barclays, Jess Staley, he tried to unmask the anonymous whistleblower, and he was fined $1 million and I think $1 million, but he gets to keep his job. So
he's a man of integrity.
He's an American in charge of Barclays. The guy in charge of BP is an American. They've got their AGM on Monday. This woman's an American who's going to take over. Mark Carney, Canadian guy, still in charge. Oh, by the way, how do you feel about the menopausal economy?
Explain.
Yeah, so Ben Broadbent, who was in the running to become the head of the Bank of England, he's also ex-Goldman Sachs. He was referring to, I think it was climacteric, which means climax or climate. And I think it was basically to say, look, the economy goes up and down, and at the moment it's going down. But when he had to explain it, he said, you could say it's menopausal. Financial experts say menopausal. And some people said, why are you using that type of language? It may be an accepted term amongst certain people. And it was quite interesting to see some people said, well, I thought, oh, cool, that means he's out of the running to be Bank of England. But then later on, yesterday, I saw somebody say, actually, he should be sacked or he should resign, because Kate Andrews, funnily enough, from the Institute of Economic Affairs, the opaque Institute of Economic Affairs, she is very good at doing all of this anti-feminist stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how genuine it is, but...
well, she inserts herself in conversations with the right conversations to make things look overblown.
Yeah, exactly. She's so good at language and arguing and things like that. She's basically said, he hasn't actually committed a crime here, so you should leave him there. But what she also said was that the Bank of England said that they wanted to stop the use of the word chairman, and say chairperson and stuff like that, because they wanted to actually get rid of all gender-related language. So she said they were kind of hoist by their own petard.
Interesting.
What else is going on? Well, of course, Erdogan was here, and Theresa May defended Turkey from the Kurds, amazingly.
We also did...
But not mentioning, the fact that it's Kurdish fighters and British people who went out there to save us from ISIS.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got a video out this week from the Royal Windsor Horse Show where the Queen entertained the King of Bahrain, King Hamad, who is accused of human rights abuses. And there's, we interviewed Saeed, who, because of his protest activities in the UK, his family had been detained and tortured and targeted in Bahrain. And he was talking about this really complicit relationship that's going on between intelligence services here and there. And because King Hamad sponsors the Royal Windsor Horse Show, he gets to sit here and be treated, wonderfully. But they've also bought £82 million worth of arms from us since the Arab Spring. And we've got a good piece on the site called Bahrain, British Colonialism and a Short History of Repression, which talks about the relationship between Britain and Bahrain. It's been strengthened through a new UK naval base that's now in Bahrain.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe Philip Hammond might even be the one who was there to open it. Don't quote me on that.
Well, speaking of Philip Hammond, I think I saw a story about an MP called Mel Stride, this is a tiny little piece, who said we must have a low-tax Brexit. It's got to be maximum tax, 17%. I think, assume that's corporation tax. And I thought, that's quite similar to what Philip Hammond said. Just quickly, a few other stories that I saw mentioned. There was one story that said we have to arm rural cops. Another story, I think, said we should arm cops generally.
Oh, yeah, they want more police with rifles on the streets of... I mean, is this the preparation of us, the Americanization before this trade deal? I mean, you mentioned all these Americans being here. Now, the idea, why do we need cops with rifles walking our streets?
Well, I don't think every American...
They don't even have any money.
Well, I don't think every American over here wants that. I think Sajid
Well,
Javid
no,
does.
of course not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting period.
They're doubling troops in Afghanistan. Apparently that's a bit of a Trump order. Also, you've got this whole thing with Iran. So prices are going up because of oil, like embargoes in Iran and Russia. And there was this company called ZTE, big Chinese firm. Trump was like, we're going to take you out. And then afterwards he tweeted, we're going to save you. Even though you've been selling American goods inside your phones to Iran and North Korea. Apparently 500 million had been given to a Trump theme park in Indonesia. And
really?
Yes, Chinese money, 500 million, went to a Trump theme park in Indonesia. And then afterwards he sent out the tweet saying, we're going to try and do something about it. So he's been paid off. When I mentioned this to somebody from Iran, he just said, yeah, that would have just been a direct payment to Trump.
Of course it is. I mean, this is what his hotels and his sites have been used for. Right now, he entertains when foreign visitors come. They stay at his hotel and get on his good side and pay him money, essentially. I think there was a story not so long ago about the membership to his golf club. Now, if you sign up, you essentially can have secret, unminuted meetings with the president for a cash amount.
Okay, so once again, as we near the end of our podcast, I say, why do we have to be so miserable and always complain about everything all the time? I blame you, Kam.
It's not my fault.
All right, fair enough. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens at the BP AGM, and maybe I'll be able to have a better answer to Roger Hallam about what it takes to get on the front page of The Guardian. How many people do you need to get arrested?
And if any of our listeners want to sign up, let us know.
Oh, you'll have to be a very stable person for that, by the way. Okay, well, that's fantastic. See you next week.
Bye.